Welcome to the Living Well with Mental Illness podcast, where we explore the journey of living a fulfilling life with mental health challenges. Join us for real and vulnerable conversations about the difficult realities of living with a mental illness. We'll discuss how to find acceptance, build resilience, and discover what recovery and living well means to you.
Today we're talking about why we're not built for this. And by this I mean why mental health, our mental health, society's mental health hasn't really kept up with what our society is like today, what society demands of us today. I think that kind of asking this question or having a conversation about this question could also be a little telling about why mental illness exists in our society today.
I think that's a little speculative, but yeah, that it could be a component as to why people maybe are struggling with their mental health more than they were. Perhaps maybe not the root of mental illness, but for sure a contributing factor to people struggling with their mental health, because the demands of society and the demands of the way we're expected to live our life are, vastly different from what they were several hundred years ago even, and hugely vastly different tens of thousands of years ago. And so I guess the question is here, how are we supposed to keep up with these demands while still taking care of our mental health?
So before kind of discussing this further, I think it's worth acknowledging the fact that just based on the idea that we haven't really evolved for the current demands of society. I think there's a lot of guilt around having not great mental health or having mental illness. And I think that it's worth just acknowledging that that we weren't really built for the demands of today's society. And we probably shouldn't feel that guilt. It's not our fault. We're not doing what we've evolved to do.
Well, I think what's interesting too, or perhaps not interesting, sad more so, is that what largely is part of the narrative right now around mental health and mental illness is kind of putting the onus of struggling with your mental health on the individual. They're not having enough coping strategies. They're not taking care of their mental health enough, when really a perhaps arguably bigger part of the puzzle here is how our society is built to not promote, what's the opposite of promote, to demote mental health.
I think something that isn't really thought of that much is how our social structures haven't developed in order to support the kind of technological growth and development that we have seen over the past 200 years. And actually, I would argue that technological development has come at the expense of, social structures that did or were stronger before, I guess it would be agricultural industrial revolution.
I think the technological component is a big one, you're right, but also things just like urbanization. What used to be a strong focus on small communities of people who could rally together and provide support for each other doesn't really exist very much in urban life anymore. It's just kind of vast metropolis sprawls of people just kind of all in the same place, working 9 to 5. And there's less of that community, built-in community, which I think promotes mental health.
And almost, I think when you're talking about small communities, I think about how it was a necessity. It was a necessity to kind of figure out how to get along with your neighbors and
right.
That kind of thing. And I think what we've especially seen recently is divisiveness with respect to larger communities and polarization, perhaps as a byproduct or maybe directly as a byproduct of technology, social media.
Not having to make it work with people that you don't necessarily agree with or don't line up perfectly with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's detrimental.
Mm-hmm. So given where we are right now, not equipped to kind of handle things, what do you think should be done? What do you think should be done kind of on like a societal level, and maybe also, and probably definitely an individual level, to help change things? I don't want to say just cope, but help change things.
My God, that's a big question.
Yeah, putting you on the spot.
Yeah, come on. I don't know. Like, I think there's like almost soul searching that needs to happen as a society in terms of, okay, what do we value here? What do we want to prioritize moving forward as a society? And as it stands, I think what we're prioritizing is progress, productivity, these typical things that have driven us over the last hundreds of years. And they're not working great for us anymore.
They're not sustainable.
They're not sustainable. And I think that's really coming to light more now with, the dawn of pretty much everyone dealing with mental health struggles at one point or another, because we're just not, again, it's not sustainable. We're not built for this.
Do you think that from a problem-solving perspective here, there's an element of looking back to the past, like what has worked in the past? And I guess that's a study on its own, trying to figure out what has worked in the past, but maybe also looking at how did we evolve from like the small community perspective, village perspective, hunter-gatherer perspective. What can we take from all of that and bring into the future? I'm not saying we should be hunter-gatherers or anymore, but how do we kind of nurture that evolutionary instinctual thing that we all have?
I think it's difficult just from the sense of the world was a lot smaller to the individual person back then. The world has kind of been blown open to everyone. And I think we're finding that that's hard to deal with. I think like what we mentioned in the first episode of this podcast, what does good mental health means? It means life satisfaction. It means finding purpose, finding meaning. And the way we would have done that in years past in hunter-gatherer type communities would be, I'm fulfilling my role as gathering berries and foliage. I'm fulfilling my role of tending to the young in the community. I'm fulfilling my role of hunting for food, preparing food, whatever. They were very well-defined parameters for roles within the community. And we just don't have that anymore. The world is so vast in terms of the potential avenues you can choose to take and the potential repercussions for each of those choices. And so I think it's a nice thought to go back to looking at what's been successful in the past, but
there is no going back.
There's no going back. We've come this far. We need to figure out how to work with the way it is now.
Okay. So what about social structures that could be developed to better facilitate growth of mental health? If we could say growth of mental health, that doesn't sound like the right
improvement of mental health, or what do you mean?
Improvement of society's mental health.
Okay. I don't know. Do you have any suggestions? I think that's where we're getting hung up on. Is, again, we've talked about this in the past episode of a lot of the current action around mental health, improving mental health, as being driven from corporations, which basically run our society the way it currently stands. And that's problematic. We need to just address the fact that that's inherently making it impossible to solve the issue because it's coming directly from a system that is built to impede good mental health. And so I think there needs
maximize productivity.
Maximize productivity, yeah. And so I think there needs to be either more of a grassroots movement coming from the people, community building, or there needs to be a revolution, some other form of system needs to take hold that prioritizes the mental well-being of its people. Did I get too revolutionary, too radical a little bit? Hey, you're seeing my true colors now, everyone. Sorry. Do you know what I mean, though? That the action that we're currently trying to do to improve society's mental health is
It's still for corporate interest.
Inherently flawed. It is never going to succeed because of the interests it's working for.
I get it. I think that makes perfect sense. I don't think that you can approach mental health from the perspective of productivity,
right,
or maximizing productivity, because the reality is that I don't think optimization of mental health means optimization of productivity.
Mm-hmm. They're kind of conflicting values.
Wow, I don't really know where to go from here. Like, I have this inner sense of loss.
I share in your loss.
I feel worse off now having asked the question.
Okay, well, how do we turn this around? Or maybe we don't need to turn it around. Maybe this is part of, working on it, is sitting with the discomfort of the problems that currently exist in our mental health landscape.
I like that. I mean, I don't like it, but I think you're right. I think we do have to kind of sit with those problems as individuals, but also as a society.
Mm-hmm.
And ask ourselves as a society where our values lie.
Right.
I wish there was a quick fix. Sorry, go ahead.
What were you going to say?
Well, sidebar, you and I are starting indoor soccer league on Saturday. And we've been really excited about it. Like, the idea of sporting.
Yeah.
And I mean, it seems like there's a pretty strong community element behind it. And that's probably just one example of like how you can add back community to your life. And there must be tons of different ways that you can do that. I mean, I know there's tons of different sports that we could try, but.
Yeah. And you said, I wish there was a quick fix. And I think that's a common sentiment. I think there's a reason people get so frustrated and lose hope when struggling with their mental health, because it does seem bleak. When you work,
it seems isolating too.
It seems isolating. It seems like there is no fix. But I think what's important, again, like what you said, we need to figure out what our values are to move forward in terms of a way that promotes mental health. And for us, that means building community again. And so doing things like joining a soccer team or whatever, finding community wherever you can as one pillar of working on your mental health. And, where I was going with this was just that I think people want that quick fix. They want to go to therapy and come home and feel a lot better. They want to take some sort of psychiatric medication and then feel a lot better, but it's just not that simple. It's a really complicated system of things that need to come together to promote individual and collective mental health.
I think you're spot on. Finishing on that silver lining is
the way to go.
Is a good place to end. And that, despite, I guess, not being built for this, we're all still here and trying to figure out the best way to get by, I guess, as partially as coping strategy, but also partially as how to institute change, lasting societal change. It's a good place to end.
Okay, let's wrap it up. So thank you everyone so much for tuning in for this second episode of our podcast. It's been really fun engaging in this way, a new way with you all. Just a reminder that you can find this episode or our podcast in general, wherever you find your podcasts. But just a quick encouragement to check out our YouTube channel, where we will engage with people through the comment section. You can find out more about what's going on with our various projects in the description of our videos, and you can subscribe so as not to miss any future videos. So that's on our YouTube channel, Living Well with Mental Illness. So thank you so much again, everyone, for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.